what is the entire process of becoming a Forbes 30 under 30? Because I'm very sure that a lot of people consider it covetous.
In terms of the logistics, how it worked, Forbes, they reached out to me about 1 month before the list came out to say, you've been nominated and we've shortlisted you. Obviously, have tens of thousands of people applying, and then for each list, they'll shortlist 100. So that's the stage they reach out to me. They say, we've got a list of 30, but we've got 100 people who have to get into this list of 30. So what they asked me is just...
Let's try to get your perspectives on what did LSE really give you at a skill level, at a network level, and were there any aspects of it which were overhyped that you think they were after you graduated, and what would those elements of the degree would have been overhyped as per you? Any opportunities, any newer network, any new privileges that Forbes 30 under 30 gave to you? I'm asking because the list is pretty covetous, but what's next? Do you want to know how to become a Forbes 30 under 30? In this Shatakshi Show, I am going to be talking to Rory, who is also Global Governance Initiative Awardee of 30 under 30. He has impacted lives of more than 50,000 people through his volunteer program during COVID. He is a graduate from LSE and of course has also been awardee of Martin Luther King Award. In this show, you will know his journey. Why did he decide to take higher education? How did that entire campaign and how did his entire volunteer strategy come to life? And how is he leveraging all the opportunities and the awards that have come into his life to advance his career? And of course, if you like the entire Shatakshi Show with Rory, feel free to like and subscribe to this channel so that you get to learn and advance your journey with people like Rory and many other people and the leaders that I've invited on my channel. With that, let's get started. So, welcome Rory to the Shatakshi Show. Very excited and of course honored to get on this chat with you, understand about your roller coaster journey till now, and of course uncover a lot of insights that can be helpful to a lot of other youth across the world who might take inspiration from you and might want to perhaps emulate your footsteps. And of course, congratulations on being GGI 30 under 30. You have a lot of interesting hats that you are wearing. There are a lot of laurels that we can celebrate for you, for example, for being a Forbes 30 under 30 as well. I would absolutely love to start from the start. So why don't you introduce yourself, perhaps a little bit from childhood. Where did you grow up? What were childhood and family debates and dinner table topics were like? And then we'll move forward.
Sure. Well, first, let me say thank you for having me on your show. It's a real pleasure to talk to you. And yeah, to take it right back, so I grew up in the southeast of the UK, not too far from London, and I was always very lucky to have my family around. And I'm the youngest of three, so I was always having debates perhaps beyond my age in terms of what my brother and sister, who are 5 and 7 years older, were talking about. So I think from an early age, I was exposed to topics that I might not otherwise have been exposed to. And that gave me the chance to, explore different topics and learn more about the world, perhaps before most other people would have had the chance to. So I was very lucky. And through that process, realized that there was a lot of really, big injustices in the world. And there's so many, even just within the microcosm where I live, there was a lot of inequality. And I was very fortunate myself to have quite a comfortable upbringing. But I realized that not everyone had that. And that made me want to make sure that I used the opportunities I had to then try and help and make sure other people could have the same opportunities. And I did that in a number of ways, which I'm sure we'll get into. But yeah, fundamentally, from a young age, I was aware of the fact that there were big discrepancies in opportunities and wanted to set out to make a difference and move the needle on those issues where I lived.
Very beautiful. That's very meaningful introduction. I'm also one of the youngest siblings. And I genuinely believe that youngest get a lot of strategic advantages in not doing the mistakes that the elder ones did, and perhaps learning few best practices as well. Do you want to very briefly talk about what was it like to be the youngest? What kind of advantages you had, or maybe disadvantages as well?
I think definitely the advantage I mentioned previously about being exposed to topics that I wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to discuss and learn more about the world, I think is a bit. Also, just another thing, the advantage of being the youngest is that my parents had already had, seen 2 children through childhood. And so perhaps they were slightly less strict with me and I had more ability to kind of do what I want. And that might seem irrelevant, but actually I think that's quite important for the person I've become in terms of very entrepreneurial, very risk-taking, but also thinking outside the box. I think being able to kind of be left to do my own thing and be independent actually helped for influence the way that I viewed things, the way I did things. And perhaps that's part of the reason why I got into the world of entrepreneurship and doing things myself. So I think that's also another advantage. Obviously it has its very tangible advantages of being able to do things that my brother and sister couldn't on a very personal level, but also in a business sense. I think that also conditioned me to perhaps be a bit more innovative as well, which helped me to get to where I am today.
This is really beautiful, and I resonate with a lot of emotions you are sharing. While, of course, it's not in anyone's choice to become the youngest or the oldest, of course. I also think that if someone turns out to be the youngest, they can leverage a lot of opportunities in terms of freedom of choices and freedom in terms of other professional arenas that they can pick. With that, Rory, I would like to cover your journey till Forbes 30 Under 30. Where did you start your education from? What were other pivotal decisions that led you towards Forbes 30 Under 30? And at some point of time, we may want to also cover what is the entire process of becoming a Forbes 30 Under 30, because I'm very sure that a lot of people consider it covetous. But first question first, would absolutely love to cover your journey till Forbes.
Sure. So as we were talking about before, I'm very passionate about addressing some of the imbalances and inequalities in society. And from a young age, the way I kind of got into the whole world of social impact is I joined the local youth council in the area where I live in the UK. So this is essentially a group where people can come together, young people can come together and talk about issues that matter to them in their community. And I used that then as a platform to get elected to the UK Youth Parliament, which was essentially doing the same thing but on a national level. So I went to London and represented the interests of my constituents back at home, around 250,000 people under 18. And I went to talk with members of the government cabinet ministers and essentially lobby on behalf of the people I represent to make sure that when the government was making policy, it represented the interests of young people. Because young people don't always have a vote, they can't vote under 18. Sometimes the government doesn't necessarily think about how new laws, new policy will impact young people. So I was passionate to kind of make our voices heard and communicate that to the members of the government. And then I went to study at university, the London School of Economics in London. And at that time, halfway through the first year of my study, the COVID-19 pandemic started, which of course wasn't ideal. But I knew that given my background in advocacy and addressing issues, I wanted to do something to help other people. So I didn't quite know what that was going to look like, but I just started a volunteering organisation in the town where I was living in the UK. And it was just, all we were doing was printing out and delivering flyers, posters to each door on the street and just saying, here's my number, give me a call if you need help with buying groceries or taking your pet for a walk if you're isolating, basic things like this. And I also shared on social media about what I was doing to encourage other people, my followers, to help as well. And the word quite quickly spread. And so in a few weeks, we were not just in my town, we were in other areas around. And then three months down the line, we had managed to scale to 40 countries and 6 continents around the world. And we actually made a mobile app that people could download and find people in their area who needed help, or if you needed help, you could find volunteers in your area. So we went from something very small in my village to then taking this to 40 countries around the world. We had 50,000 volunteers. And then that was the reason that I was in the Forbes 30 Under 30 list. So as I say, didn't intend to create that when the pandemic started, but it just happened that we had a model that worked and I wanted to help as many people as possible. So it was natural to take the steps to accelerate that impact and help more people in different parts of the world. So that was the journey from starting in advocacy through to creating this organization, which is the reason I got into Forbes.
Bravo. It's a classic example of making impact first without anticipating any reward in return. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you got rewarded for what it was. I'm just a little curious to understand your model. So the volunteers did everything from taking your dog for a walk during the COVID-19 to perhaps providing medicinal supplies as well, to understand that correctly. So is that what the model was?
That's right. So we really were just helping with basic daily tasks that people couldn't do as a result of the pandemic. So either people were sick, or they were isolating, or they were vulnerable, so they didn't want to go to the supermarket. And nowadays in lots of countries, India included, there's a lot of companies which will deliver groceries to cities pretty quickly. But in the UK and indeed in India, back 3-4 years ago, that infrastructure wasn't so widespread. So not everyone could order groceries online. So, for example, in the UK at the start of the pandemic, all the slots to order food were taken. And so most people, if they were stuck at home, they couldn't get any food. Most people can ask their friend or their family, but some people don't have those connections in the community. So our volunteers were just helping with things like delivering medicine, delivering food, or even just talking over the phone to prevent loneliness. Some people who live alone and don't have connections, this was a really tough time. Months and months they were stuck at home and they just wanted to talk to someone. So we paired people, to have a conversation and just chat to really help people's mental health. So it was all sorts of different things, but just basic daily tasks that people couldn't necessarily do during the pandemic like they could outside of the health crisis.
Very nice articulation. I want to double click on something you said, which is very powerful. Loneliness, especially, I believe it accelerated a lot, especially, I would say, a little more in Western countries than in, let's say, a nation state like India, where families and joint families are commonly living together. Could you very briefly highlight one or two stories about loneliness that you encountered yourself or your volunteers encountered, and what kind of impact were you able to make in the lives of others?
Sure. So one example that comes to mind is actually we had a really successful rollout of this in Colombia in South America. So there's just one example. There was a charity there that was already doing work to prevent loneliness before the pandemic started. But we partnered with them and they could then use our app because they only knew a certain number of people who were lonely and in the areas where they operated. They didn't know how to find other people that needed their help without spending a lot of money on advertising, which is a charity they can do. But by onboarding their volunteers onto our app, they were able to find people across Colombia who were needing help with something like just talking to prevent loneliness. So this is an example of how the third sector or volunteering sector doesn't really use technology or innovation as much as in other sectors. It's kind of lags behind. But this was a digital app. This was a revolution in the sense that it just democratized access to help. Anyone could log on and create an account and find someone to support. And so this charity we worked with, from going from 50 people they knew who needed help, they could then see 1,000 people who their volunteers could partner with and talk to. So I think it's just an example of how technology can massively accelerate impact. It has an impact in private sector, public sector, but traditionally third sector is quite slow to adopt change. So this is, I think, a really exciting example of how innovation can really create a bigger impact.
You said something fundamentally very important, and many people do not even realize this. The inefficiencies in non-profits and charity sector are just so huge, because when you run for profitability, that is when you run for efficiency, technological advancements. And thank you so much for actually having a tech advancement in the world of volunteering, because of which you were able to make large scale impact. I very often think, believe, and say this as well. When one person goes through adversity or one person goes through injustice, then it is a huge opportunity to create large scale impact. I will be very humbled to perhaps create a comparison with Gandhi. When Gandhi was in South Africa, he went through an injustice himself. He was thrown out of the train. He felt that how brown people were distinguished than the white people, and that one injustice with that one man created such large scale change. So I'm just so glad that you went through something and then you decided to create a large scale change. Very beautiful story. And once again, congratulations, Rory, for that. Would you now mind talking through the process of, let's say, Forbes 30 Under 30? Like we said, a lot of people are excited to apply for Forbes 30 Under 30. And a lot of people think that a lot happens behind the curtains. There is information asymmetry as well. So if you could share the process, that I'm very sure will be very helpful for the global youth.
Certainly. I think the first thing I would say, the biggest caveat is that you mentioned obviously a lot of people are excited to apply for Forbes 30 Under 30. The way I see it is that you should do something you're passionate about, or do something exciting, and then the byproduct of that is getting to Forbes 30 Under 30. I'm very lucky to speak to a lot of young people in schools and universities at events around the world, and quite often this question comes up, and I say the aim shouldn't be to get into Forbes. The aim should be to do something that's impactful or profitable, and then you also get into Forbes. So if you set out to do something just to get in the Forbes list, it's unlikely to work, because you're not going to have the motivation. And it's yeah. That I'm just saying the primary motivation should be something else. But specifically in terms of how to get into the list, for me, I can offer some insight on the back end of the process, the final bits. But for me, I was nominated by someone who to this day I don't know who it was. So I didn't nominate myself, so I can't speak to the application process or whatever. But in terms of the logistics, how it worked, Forbes, they reached out to me about 1 month before the list came out to say, you've been nominated and we've shortlisted you. I later found out that I think it's something like, actually I can't remember the numbers now, but they shortlist, I think the list in the European list has 300, it's 10 categories of 30, and I think they shortlist about 100 people for each list of 30. So obviously, you know, have tens of thousands of people applying, and then for each list they'll shortlist 100. So that's the stage they reach out to me. They say, we've got a list of 30, but we've got 100 people who have to go into this list of 30. So what they asked me is just, you know, give us some more information about what you've done, some metrics, you know, numbers, because it's easy to say, oh, you know, we help people or whatever, but how many people did we help? What was the impact? Because of course, whoever nominated me, I don't know what information they would have given. So Forbes, they just wanted more information about myself, about the impact I'd had. And then that information gets sent to a judging panel, you know, experts in the social impact list. I was in the social impact list, so there's experts in social impact. So they look at these 100 shortlisted people and turn them into a 30 list. So I gave Forbes the list. I gave Forbes the information about myself a month before the list came out, and they said that I wouldn't hear anything more until the list came out. So I didn't know whether I was going to be on it. They don't tell you you're going to be on it, so I just checked when the list came out. And I remember specifically it came out in US time, so it came out at midnight, but that was 5 a.m. in the UK where I was. So I woke up at 5 a.m. and looked at the list, and I was on it, and I was like, oh well, that's great. And then I went back to sleep because it was early in the morning. But yeah, so the process itself, I can't speak to the application, but they will reach out to you if you're shortlisted for more information. And then you give, you know, tangible metrics about what it is you've done, whether that's revenue, profit if you're a business, or like, you know, money raised, VC money, or if you're a non-profit, how many people you helped, how you've helped them, all that information, and they'll take that and then decide who gets into the final list. And they won't tell you; you'll just find it, you'll just see it on the list when it gets published. So it's quite a strange process, but yeah, it was a shock.
Beautiful. If I were to synthesize, I kind of got 3 points which caught my attention. Number 1 was that you were nominated by someone else. Number 2, that your numbers really helped for you overall. And number 3, and this is my understanding from your story, it clearly signifies that you were really trying to make a change in the world. And that would have certainly stood out for your category, which is social impact, which is literally a version of philanthropy. And of course, you might know a better summary, but for the audience, I thought of distilling these 3 points. If we were to move ahead, Rory, and perhaps talk about any opportunities, any newer network, any new privileges that Forbes 30 Under 30 gave to you, what would those be? And if not, then of course we could understand that as well. I'm asking because the list is pretty covetous, but what's next? Do you get anything else, or do you have to fight to get anything else? I'm sure the answer would be in latter, but over to you.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And yeah, actually yesterday, as it happens, I was talking to someone. I said, oh, did you get paid to be on, did they pay you when you're on the list? I said, no, but actually the value you get is not necessarily in money terms, but the value is huge. So yes, there's definitely value. The way that value, I think, presents itself is a number of different things. Firstly, just from a personal branding perspective, of course, you know, Forbes 30 Under 30 is a well-known, you know, institution or like a award. So it definitely opens doors in 2 ways. You know, doors in terms of people come to you and offer you or ask you certain things that they wouldn't have done before. So for example, I've been very lucky to speak at a lot of different events all around the world. So I've been able to travel a lot since I was in the list. And part of the reason, you know, filtering thing that people use to decide speakers is they'll look at people who they don't need to validate, does that person know what they're talking about, or is that person legitimate? Because when you're on the list, that kind of gives them that validation. So I think that helps. Also, I've done a lot of advisory work, again, with, you know, large corporations, and being 21 or just now 22, I guess most large corporations wouldn't necessarily ask a person of my age to advise them on matters of sustainability or social impact, but having, again, that Forbes credential opens those doors. So it certainly certainly, makes it those opportunities come. The other thing is as well, it helps you to kind of get ahead when you're trying to do your own work, whether it's things like raising money for a business, or whether it's just reaching out to someone who you really admire. They're more likely to reply to you because you have that credential. So it works both ways, and I think that value is, as I say, it's not in monetary terms, but that value can be huge for career advancement and someone who's young and trying to get ahead. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of the main benefits. But of course, it is still what you make of it. These opportunities don't just come to you if you just wait. You still have to work hard. But yeah, I'd say there's definitely a lot of benefits of being in the list.
Got it. To how it sounds to me, it sounds almost like another badge of a covetous degree, maybe. For example, you go to Harvard Business School. Now, the entire institution and the legacy of Harvard has actually given you a new credibility. So more people will trust you, more doors will open for you, and of course, more people would want to reach out to you. With that, Rory, I may want to pivot and talk about your line of work also now. Just for the audience, I may want to tell them that it was 12:30 in the midnight when we started this podcast, and you told me that you had a very hectic day and you were just actually wrapping up with the other meetings, which means that you're, to my mind, a very productive person, and you might be very motivated as well. So could you talk me through what keeps you motivated at work? What keeps you productive at work, especially a person of your credibility, of your stature, and of your age? How are you managing it all? What may be certain techniques and strategies to stay motivated and productive?
Sure. So I guess firstly, in terms of what motivates me, I'd say definitely working towards something I'm passionate about, whether that's in the social impact space or whether that's in other areas that I work in. I think always, if you're doing something you don't particularly enjoy, you're not going to be able to follow it through and work hard. And that's also why I say the people who start something to get in the Forbes list often don't get there, because the motivation when things get tough, because by the way, starting something, as you know yourself, is not simple. There's a lot of obstacles on the way. And if you're just trying to get into the list and you're not really passionate about the issue you're working on, then you're probably going to give up. So yeah, one thing that motivates me is I'm always passionate about the stuff I'm doing. If I'm not passionate about it, I won't, I'm not going to do it. I'll find something I'm passionate about. I guess the other thing is also working with others. I guess, the nature of startups or non-profits that are early stage is that it can be lonely sometimes, but also you're still engaging with all sorts of different people in the different tasks you're doing. And for me, I work with some great people, and without them, if I was just by myself, it would probably be hard. But you kind of feed off other people's energy and passion, and I think that's a fundamental thing that helps motivate you. In terms of strategies to manage your time, this is one thing that always comes up at events, especially for school children. They always ask, how do you do so much? And I actually have might seem counterintuitive idea, but basically, I think the more stuff you do, the more work you have, the easier it becomes to be productive. And the reason is, I always say to school children, if you have 1 week to write an essay and nothing else, it'll probably take you that 1 week to write the essay. But if you have 1 week to write an essay, attend all these meetings, do this project, have this conversation, and do these things, you have to become more efficient to fit everything in. So actually, when people say, how can I become more productive and how can I manage my time better, I tell them to do more, which might seem crazy, but I think that it really helps you become efficient and optimize your time. So the more stuff you do, the more productive you become. So that's probably the number one tip I would give people.
It's absolutely true. You fill the time for the task at hand, no matter how much soever time you get. In fact, this is one of the number one skills that I learned during my time at the formal MBA degree, whereby I was juggling between my startup, my acads, getting a job, etc. And perhaps I may use that as an example to understand your perspective of education and degree. I like to ask all my guests on the Shatakshi Show because, of course, we are disrupting education. You have been at LSE, which is, of course, a very premium institute. Let's try to get your perspectives on what did LSE really give you at a skill level, at a network level, and were there any aspects of it which were overhyped that you think they were after you graduated, and what would those elements of the degree could have been overhyped as per you?
It's a very interesting question. I have quite strong views actually on the quality or the relevance of education, particularly at a post-18 level, so at university. I think that nowadays a degree is quite often just a piece of paper that gives you, it's a passport, right? You refer to, some institutions have really good name recognition, and so if you get this degree from a good university, then it'll mean you can get a good job. But the skills you learn in this degree, particularly in the UK education system, I can't necessarily speak to the Indian education system, but in the UK, the skills you learn at university really aren't what you need for the job. So it's more a question of you pay your large amount of money, you spend your 3 years studying, and you get a piece of paper that gives you that credibility, but it doesn't give you the skills you need. Then you have to retrain, you have to learn on the job how to do the job. So I do think there's a big mismatch between the skills you need in the workplace and the skills you learn at university. So although LSE is a good institution, I generally think that universities in the UK don't really give you the skills you need for the 21st century workplace. So obviously I was a part of that system. I played into it by getting my degree, and that helped me. But I still am very skeptical about the value in skill terms that institutions and universities can give you, no matter how good they are. So yeah, that's my perspective on it.
I completely concur to that answer, and I loved your analogy with the degree being a passport. I still believe, like you said, and I've been fairly privileged and lucky myself, that my degrees also have helped me initial days from signaling point of view. In fact, you have been part of World Economic Forum. WEF came up with a study on future 21st century skills. In fact, BCG at one point of time was also involved. And they said that the future 21st century skills, from the hard skills of IoT, tech, AI, etc., and soft skill problem solving, communications, and critical reasoning. And I was just surprised. Even a lot of tier 1 top tier institutes do not teach that. And then I was just really thinking, if that's the institution, or that is the nature of tier 1 institutes, what would be the grim state of the tier 2 and tier 3 academic degrees? And thank you so much for being honest, of course, about that answer. I would now want to pivot and talk about your experience on unlocking networking. Rory, you are going a lot of places. You are also advising a lot of interesting clients, such as the Fortune 500 or equivalent. Would absolutely love if you could talk about the power of networking, and most importantly, if you could perhaps give an example of a good networking that you did where perhaps the network didn't come to you on a platter and you had to fight it out. The reason I'm saying this is because a lot of young connections now understand that there is a jargon or a buzzword called networking, but they don't know anything after that. They don't know the next step. In fact, it's building the connections that have helped me to be wheresoever small places I have achieved in life. So would absolutely love to hear from you on the power of networking and any particular example where you cracked a network for yourself.
Certainly, and I really like the way you set it up, because it's so true. A lot of people, they just assume that I've done what I have because the network I had from my parents or something. By the way, my parents are in a completely different area to politics or to impact, and people say, "Oh, I probably just knew the right people" or whatever. But it's kind of the complete opposite. I think it's completely what you make of it. And networking is something that takes a long time, and you don't always yield the results straight away. So again, it was something that requires perseverance, because you never know. I think this works both ways as well. Now that I'm very fortunate to have got where I am, I have people who reach out to me and want to talk about stuff. And I always try to meet with anyone that does reach out to me, because it helps them, but also from my perspective, even if I think, oh, this person, I don't know how they could be useful to me, or why should I give up half an hour to talk to them? My perspective is you never know when someone might come in handy, where someone can add value or you can add value to them. So you approach all conversations with an open mind, whether you're setting them up or whether people are asking to talk to you. I think you should always try it. And I'm a busy person, but I always make time to try and talk to these people, because it helps them, but also it adds value for myself in ways that you might not think would have been the case at the time you spoke to them. I guess an example of how networking really helped me was actually, I'll give an example of when I went to India last year, just because for the purpose of this conversation. I was actually, as it happened, going to talk to a lot of different people about skill education. As I mentioned, it's an issue I'm very passionate about. I really think that in a large country like India, where there's, I think, something like 500 million people under the age of 18, it's a huge population of young people, but also the skilling ecosystem is somewhat fragmented. So I was really interested in this, and so I spent about 3 or 4 weeks in the country, sometime in New Delhi, sometime in in Mumbai. And I didn't know many people in India, but I knew that I was going there and I was going to be there. So I just reached out to a lot of people, and I ended up talking to people from the Ministry of Education in Delhi. I also met with the National Skill Development Corporation. I met with all sorts of fantastic NGOs that are doing work on the ground. I also met with corporates. Of course, CSR in India is arguably best in the world. So a lot of corporates are involved in spending on charitable projects. So there are all these fantastic people who I met, and I got a much better understanding of the skill ecosystem in India. But as I say, I didn't know anyone before I went. So what I had done is just really research people that sounded like they'd be interesting, send a lot of messages on LinkedIn, not just random messages, but looking at this person, thinking how is the best way I can engage them, sending something that was relevant, and just trying to set up a meeting. And I think in the 2 weeks, in the sort of 3-4 weeks in total that I was there, I had maybe 100 plus meetings, and these were all people who I hadn't known before, and I just had tried to generate these connections. So, that's an example of something that's not presented to you. You have to work to find people, send them the right message, schedule something. And I was so glad I did it, because I learned so much about the education system in India, which I think is one of the most exciting, of course, growing markets with a very young population. So it was a really fantastic experience. But at the same time, all those people I met wouldn't have been if I hadn't really worked hard on the networking. And this was a long time after the Forbes 30 under 30. So you still have to work hard. The network doesn't just get presented to you on a platter, as you say. So I think that's a good example.
I would say it's a fantastic example if you're meeting the education minister and the relevance box from the skill ministry. And you raise a very important point that India is a very large market. The challenge, and a lot of people, of course, are monetizing and latching upon it. The other challenge is that most of the people who are providing solutions to the school education in the school market has largely been around test prep and a lot of examination related, and those are the ones that have been successful. I really hope that there will be players who will do legit upskilling. There are few players who are coming up. In fact, I have few of my friends who are now providing those solutions. They were at HPS, left their promising careers at HPS and beyond in US, and now they are coming up to solve interesting problems that you are highlighting yourself. With that, Rory, would absolutely love to perhaps get your views on certain groundbreaking trends or certain trends that you are seeing in your industry that perhaps we can discuss and talk about. And I'm very sure it will be interesting and helpful for someone who's looking to build a career in social impact.
Sure. So I think specifically, social impact, of course, is quite a broad term. I work specifically in the corporate social responsibility side of this. So in many cases, dealing with companies who are trying to do something positive to help people, help the communities, or help the environment and where they operate. And I think one of the biggest trends I'm seeing, again, it's segmented by region. Different geographies are going at different paces, but companies do increasingly seem to want to have some sort of corporate social responsibility strategy, whether for better or worse. Lots of companies will try and do some marketing piece and make it seem like they care. But generally speaking, talking to executives, this is definitely something that's accelerating. I do a lot of work in the Middle East region, so really the Gulf, so Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, and obviously, traditionally speaking, US, UK, Western Europe are ahead of these countries, but we're seeing some strong trends of business leaders becoming more aware and wanting to also take action on these issues. So I think that's really interesting, and it's a positive sign as long as it's done in the right way. But I think, generally speaking, the trends are that those companies are looking to do a lot more. But the reason, largely speaking, is that the consumers, the market is changing too. So something like 80% of Generation Z, so that's people my age, I don't know quite what exactly, but people under 25, let's say, 80% of those people won't buy a product from a company that doesn't match their values. So companies are having to think, well, this is a generation with $1 trillion of purchasing power, and it's only going to increase. So how can we make sure we don't lose that business? Or even in terms of attracting talent, I think, again, it's something like 75% of people in Gen Z say they won't work for a company if it doesn't, have a purpose or care about certain issues. So attracting and retaining the best talent, again, is a priority of any company, and that's limited if they can't look at corporate social responsibility. So there's a lot happening in this space, and it's changing quite fast and at different paces in different places. But generally the trends are quite positive as long as it's done correctly.
Got it. You raise a very interesting point about growing interest in CSR, corporate social responsibility. In India, for example, based on my personal anecdotes and the projects that I've done, there is another challenge that uh, the money might go to, let's say, nonprofits and equivalents. But because we understand largely compared to for-profit sector, nonprofits are a little less efficient. Most of the corporates are not even able to monitor the tangible outcome that comes out of that entire money supply that's going on ground. Perhaps that could be another interesting problem that you could put your hands on. And of course, in our own shape or format, we at GTI are also trying to solve it. We have so there's a little tangent that I'm taking. When I was at BCG, I kind of felt that I was making rich people richer. So hence, when I started GTI, we started a non-profit advisory arm of GTI, whereby we advise non-profits and we help them become more efficient, so that they could also lead towards a higher impact. With that, I would almost would want to come towards the last curiosity that I have for you, which will be what may be certain breathtaking projects or audacious goals that you might have for yourself. I saw that you are doing a startup in stealth. I understand you may not want to share everything about it, but if you may want to share some bit about it, that would be very helpful.
Certainly. So yeah, it's not directly related to the work I've done in the past. We're actually building something in artificial intelligence, which is obviously a very interesting sector at the moment. Although that being said, I do retain all the interests I had in the past. So I think this is also what makes things. We talked about motivation earlier, but this is also something that keeps me motivated. Is that no day is the same. So I still travel a lot to speak at conferences about sustainability. I also still have various advisory commitments with the UK government, and also with corporations as well, talking about sustainability and corporate social responsibility. And then also I'm working on a startup at the same time. So this variation, I think, is what keeps me going. But yeah, specifically in the startup I'm working on now, we're actually working with creators, influencers and creators to help them engage their fans in a better way using artificial intelligence. So it's not directly related to what I was doing previously, but I actually have a lot of experience working with creators, because when I had my non-profit, we were trying to promote the word, and we had lots of non-paid marketing. So we were just reaching out to influencers and asking them to promote us if they liked our message. So we weren't paying them, but it was like I had a lot of experience dealing with creators. So yeah, I wanted to work on that, and yeah, it's been really interesting in the time since.
This is a beautiful market, because most of the people actually talk about this out loud as well, that the creator economy is the next big trend. And I like how the horizontal and the vertical are intersecting with you, with the rise of AI and the rise of the creator economy. I have one more curiosity about you. You seem to be a person who at a very young age is been there, done all kind of a person. What may be your biggest fear at this stage in life?
That's a good question. Biggest fear, I think obviously one of the things that is great but also bad about doing entrepreneurial things is you don't really have much vision of the future. If someone asks me, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do you see yourself? Obviously, classic question. It's very hard to forecast given the instability and uncertainty that surrounds the world of doing your own thing. Of course, when I left university, I was lucky to have some offers, graduate offers from really good companies, and a part of me wanted to do that, and lots of my friends and various other people were saying, well, of course you've got to take these are great companies. So it was a big conflict in my own head to say, actually no, I really want to do something myself. I want to have an impact. I talk about marginal impact. In terms of if you join a company at a graduate level, let's say Deloitte, for example, is one of the companies I had an offer from to do consulting. If I don't join that company, someone else is going to do the exact same thing. They'll find someone else who does the exact same thing. It's not Rory making an impact, it's just someone the same. So when I think about the marginal impact, it's what can you do that someone else wouldn't have done? And that's what I like to work on. And so it was a big risk to turn down those offers because good companies and startup is a lot more risky. But I knew that was what I would feel more fulfilled about. But of course, the byproduct of that is you don't have much certainty on how things will pan out. So perhaps the biggest fear is also this great thing. The instability is exciting. You're working on all sorts of different things. It's perhaps more exciting than doing a graduate job. But at the same time, the flip side of that is you don't really know where you're going to be 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, and that is, of course, not easy. So that's probably one of the biggest fears or challenges of doing what I'm doing.
Wow, thank you so much for speaking candidly. I completely resonate with your story on Deloitte. That is what my emotions were when I was leaving BCG, that someone else could do exactly what I'm doing. But my heart and my soul lies somewhere else at this stage in my life. And just to help you feel a little bit good, when I started my first venture, at least in the first year, we didn't have a lot of, let's say, clarity on what the 10-year vision, etc. would be. Now, of course, we have clarity. We want to replace Harvard Business School in India. When I say that to people, of course, many people say that that's a big goal. But the larger point that I'm actually using this example also for the audience is to say that nobody gets it all clear in the first attempt. People like you will certainly get it very soon, if not later. And I got it in some process. And I really hope that anyone who's watching this would get it also in some bit of time. Thank you so much, Rory, for being candid, for being so articulate. I've had very few guests who were so pinpointed and specific with their answers. Most of the times, if I ask 2 questions, they forget the second one. You are clearly very articulate. Would absolutely love to hear if you have any last words for our audience who would absolutely love to take inspiration for their careers and beyond.
Yeah, certainly. I think the number one thing I would say to people, and I mentioned this earlier, but it's crucial, is to work on something you're passionate about. If you want to create an impact, that's great. Some people want to create an impact for their resume or for Forbes or whatever it be, but the people that do something they're truly passionate about, they don't necessarily know what they want to work on, but find something and try different things. And then when you find something you're passionate about, work on it and keep working. As I mentioned, the journey is not linear. There's a lot of ups and downs, but if you're passionate about something, you'll keep pushing, and then the impact that you can make is really unlimited if you continue building your network and creating your own luck. I believe in that, creating your own luck. Not everything will come to you, but if you work hard, then you can do anything. So those are probably the passing words I would give.
So beautiful. Here's to creating your own luck, and here's to having non-linear journey. Thank you so much, Rory, for this late night pod on the Shatakshi Show. It was really amazing to hear your interesting stories. Would absolutely love to stay in touch. Goodbye.